Good evening. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself, how does a person learn to read? We often hear a great many glib answers to that question, but when you stop to think it over carefully, you realize that how a person learns to read is one of those great mysteries, as is any kind of learning. However, we have discovered and developed a variety of ways and theories and methods of teaching reading. Tonight, one of the leading experts in teaching reading is with us. He is Dr. Donald Durrell, professor of English at Boston University in Massachusetts. Talking with him is Dr. James L. Jarrett, president of Western Washington State College. Tonight, you've been listening to a conversation between Dr. James L. Jarrett, president of Western Washington State College, and Dr. Donald Durrell, professor of education at Boston University in Massachusetts, an authority in the field of teaching reading. Good night.
Dr. Durrell, I have the general impression, which I imagine you share, that seldom in our history in this country has there been as much interest as there is today in the problem of reading, in learning to read and continuing to read. And I should like to ask you a general evaluation on your part. How well do American youth read today?
Well, fortunately, they can still read, and I think they're reading better than they ever have. It's a little hard to prove this, except for the fact that colleges are more and more pleased with the quality of people who come to them and are getting fussier and fussier about the people they take in. Also, any types of measures we apply that were used 20 years ago or 30 years ago versus today's use will show a higher degree of achievement of reading. On the other hand, you still have many schools in which the reading is rather poorly handled. You can't generalize for American schools because within the same 10-mile radius, you're going to have reading taught very well, or it's emphasized beautifully in one school system, others more casual. Or even in the same building. I recall visiting a school just before the school closed in Massachusetts. In the same building, one extremely skilled first-grade teacher, across the hall another who was clumsy. By the way, both were my graduates.
Well, I guess you're saying in the latter, then, that this is not a matter of difference in methods, one using one method and another teacher using another method, and that accounting for the difference, but just something about the general skill of the teacher?
Well, it's how well the time is being used and whether the material is suitable for the child. If you have a youngster that has no ear for sounds in words, then he can't use phonics. And therefore, if he doesn't get that help, he doesn't go. A skilled teacher gives this help. A child who is weak in letter knowledge, doesn't know too much about this, is given help immediately. Some people, the child spends a lot of time coloring 6 hens red, where another person spends that same amount of time in reading several hundred words. Mm-hmm. So there's a degree of intensity, a degree of suitability, a degree of fitting the instruction to the level of ability of the child. And these are a whole series of skills. It's not just one technique. As a matter of fact, there's so little difference among the general approaches in beginning reading. It's pretty hard to tell the difference. Only the experts want to quarrel about whether you do vowels first or consonants first. It's very minor.
One does hear, though, today a good deal of criticism directed against the teaching of reading, particularly as I read the popular literature, against what is believed to be a neglect of phonics. Are we today neglecting to teach pupils to read so that they can pronounce the words which they read? You know, one hears all of the stories about how here is a pupil who has, in some sense, learned to read. His eyes travel over the page and he has some comprehension, but you ask him to read aloud and he is lost. Or you ask him to pronounce a word and he pronounces it in some perfectly arbitrary fashion. Now, is this a well-founded criticism of a lot of the teaching today?
We had in the 1930s, when some of the more idiotic progressives were in charge of certain small numbers of schools, a whispering campaign against phonics. It had no standing whatever with the research men or the men who were in the teacher education that had some concern about the realities of service. And there's been never a colleague of mine that I know of who's been anti-phonics. As a matter of fact, most of us are constantly looking to make phonics more effective. But so many people think that any phonics is good.
Mm-hmm.
The first 2,000 reading failures, I've been studying reading failures since 1925.
I see.
And the first 2,000 I saw were in Iowa. In those days, 25, 27, the children who were failing came through Beacon and Aldine phonics, the cough and sneeze kind of phonics, and they were reading failures. So the phonics didn't correct them. The trouble was, in their case, that the youngsters didn't notice the separate sounds in spoken words, and it's a little hard to explain. And a youngster, in order to use phonics, has got to notice the speech sounds. And I brought along here, this is one thing I did bring along.
Good.
Somewhere. A way that you can tell whether a child has this ear for sounds. See, the phonetic work is so designed that he who speaks should be able to read.
Yes.
But only if he notices the sounds in the words he speaks. And many youngsters speak beautifully, have high intelligence, fine speaking vocabularies, but never notice that the first sound in magic, many, machine have a minimally, whether they don't know whether it's t or g, and so on, even though they've been taught phonics. So one of the things that I regularly do is with a group of youngsters that are having trouble, I will hand them these 4 letters in back front. I've got set for each one.
Mm-hmm.
Because usually there'll be 5 or 6 in a classroom early in the year that will have no work. So I say to them, show me M, show me B, G, F, and the children hold up the right letters.
I see.
And if they've had a little phonics, you say, show me M, and up comes M, show me B, G, and this comes up.
Mm-hmm.
Fine, I got the phonics. Then you say, show me the first letter in this word, fountain, and up comes B, and up comes M.
Mm-hmm.
They have no idea that fountain has a F in it. And this is many bright youngsters, and more boys than girls.
Now, how do you go about correcting this? How would you proceed to teach a student that F sound, as it actually occurs in the word, is
well? You have to. First, it's the problem of identifying it, and therefore we go back to speech correction techniques for this. You say to a child, say these after me: 5, 15, and you watch the lips and the teeth. 5, 15, half, feet, rough, so you can feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the ways that some of the youngsters who have not gotten it, they get it. Or how an L feels: like, listen, lake, wall, tall,
mm-hmm.
tell, and they feel it. You go back to speech correction, just as if they had speech defects, and then they begin to feel this. Or one of the easiest ones that's more dramatic for the kids is pin, pipe, paste,
mm-hmm.
tap.
Let me make sure I'm understanding this. Are you saying that you do this for the average and normal child just in the process of teaching him, or are you talking now just about
first place, you make sure that the child coming into grade 1 has this ability to notice in magic, the in take or ticket in the first week of the school. If he doesn't, he can't use look and say methods, he can't use phonic methods at all.
Mm-hmm.
Because without noticing the sound structure in the words, and about 1/3 of your first graders are deficient in this, and they're the ones you have to land on and really work. And this should be done in the first 2 months of the first grade.
Well, now, if it's
not done, the youngster is going to go through the year, and he's never going to catch out the trick of why, of the tie between the sound, because he doesn't know the sound, and he can't make the tie. And this is the primary reason for reading failures.
Well, if one starts learning reading that early in the first grade, it sounds to me as if there must be something that should go on before the child ever hits the first grade. Do you have any suggestions to parents about preparing their students for this traumatic experience?
I let parents alone. I'm maybe alone in this, but when I was 19, I gave lectures to mothers on how to raise children. But in 1933, when my first child was born, I quit teaching child psychology because I think child psychology should be taught only by people that have no children. They can be sure. And I'm grateful if parents, if send their child to school with certain, well, if a child knows the names of letters before he comes to school, if he knows that this is an M, fine. If he knows, almost all of them know that this is O and this is X, those are ones. And they learn a lot of the words stop, street signs, school signs, all sorts of essential signs you have to do nowadays. And the television has tremendous amount of impact. Mostly, ads. After all, they play up letters on all kinds of television ads.
Yes.
And so the child gets this. And a child that comes to school knowing his letters learns to read faster. We can test this by teaching 6 words in the morning and then seeing how many the child remembers in the afternoon. The children who remember all of them are virtually all youngsters who know their letters. Mm-hmm. So if you can help your child know the letters, fine.
And this means all the letters. It is he should
yeah,
know
and
there's
also,
an M and N. For
we're grateful if he knows the capital letters, but if he knows the lowercase, fine. But one of the problems in lowercase letters is this. The N and an H look a lot alike. The stem is higher. Of course, the ones that give the worst trouble in lowercase letters,
yes,
all loops on stems. We ought to have a more distinctive thing here. And by the way, also, one of the things, too, we use print rather than the cursive writing primarily because you want to diminish the number. Well, look, if this is an F, what is this?
Yes.
I mean,
two separate
symbols.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we start learning a foreign symbolism, say Sanskrit or something like this, and they have two ways of doing it, it's lots harder than having one way. So generally,
well, even the learning of German, for that matter, we would rather not have to learn the script at the same time that we're learning the language.
And so it's easier. Although many youngsters, going into grade 1, immediately move over to this on their own, even though you do this, because they think this is grown up.
I see.
And so they want to write like the grown-ups do.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the ones who know these.
Mm-hmm.
So if they know their letters before they come in. As a matter of fact, the 3- and 4-year-olds are the first, that's the age where they first show the desire to write. And I let them write. Look, there are quite a number of books that tell parents, don't teach reading. It's a very delicate thing.
Now, you don't believe this?
Nonsense. If you can read yourself and don't lie to the child, you can't do anything wrong. Because the child, anything you do, if a teacher's smart, she can utilize to a good advantage. Mm-hmm. And many youngsters force you to teach them to read at home. You don't have much choice because they bring words to you or they start writing or make you spell words for them. And sure, go ahead. That is, if you yourself know all the letters and can read the words, well, then help the child. The only thing a parent can do wrong are 2. One, if the parent gets the books from the school and ruins them for the child before the child gets to the teacher, mm-hmm. This is bad business. Mm-hmm. Let the school's material alone. The second thing, if the child doesn't come to you for the lesson, in other words, if you're driving the youngster and then he begins to run away from you, then you make reading distasteful, and it's a little harder for us, although we can get over it. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, I think there's quite a lot of things that could be done in kindergartens, but I'm not enough crusader for that because I find that if whatever a child brings to grade 1, we know what to do for him generally. Although one thing many teachers are not doing well enough is the ear training and even letters. We've had, by the way, a whispering campaign from some odd source against teaching letters. But every single study since the beginning of research in reading shows if a child knows his letters and can write them or can tell you what the names, if that's an H, that's an N, that's a P, and this is an M, and so on, this always is advantageous in learning. But for some reason or other, some people are against it, as though it's some mysterious cult that you should not do it. Mm-hmm. I don't know why. Mm-hmm. We get a lot of oddities in education, particularly from people who have taught one child, who have had one course in psychology, and they give you the true gospel.
Let's go back to the parents for a moment. Now, you're saying, if I understand you, that though the parent shouldn't force the issue, especially to make reading distasteful, he should seize upon whatever interest the child has, and I suppose you're saying the child normally does have some interest in learning letters and so forth. Suppose, then, that the parent has helped his child to learn the letters. What else? Is there anything that he can do or might helpfully do, for instance, about this matter of learning sounds?
Oh, that's a little tougher. You can, if you want to make a plan of it. The Denver you saw about the Denver TV programs for parents on how to prepare your child for reading. They scared me because it sounded as though if you don't do this, your child's bound to be bad, be failing reading. But there, they suggested that you place objects around a room and play a game and have the child bring a basket and say, "B," and a ball and say, "This is contrived, too much for me, but it's good if you can do it." Or on this table, I must confess that with one of my 3 daughters, who was quite obviously not skilled in sounds about age 3 or 4, we began to say to her, "I see things to eat that begin with k, cookies, corn, cake." And this is kind of useful, but I don't take it too seriously. One of the other things, by the way, though, this is all beginning. Obviously, parents who read newspapers, who have youngsters read back to them, and who read stories to them at night, and who go over picture books with them and so on, they are obviously, all this is to an advantage. And the youngsters the families that memorize poetry and round the table, any kind of thing, any exciting reading, fathers that remember poems and do this, it always gives a literary bent, and I think it rather helps.
I was going to mention the matter of poetry, too. Around my household, we do a lot of rhyming, not necessarily with the intention of helping in their reading, but I should think it might actually afford some ear training. They get the sounds in mind.
A lot of the Mother Goose rhymes and other, and some with a high alliteration, so that you get a pressing with single sound. All good, sure.
Yes.
But I think probably more important than the technical details of the anatomy of symbols is this business of having a interest in books and reading and library borrowing on the part of the parent, and they bring books of
Do you think that is important? To use the library?
Naturally. Because if you don't, why bother to learn to read if you don't use it? And the key to fine reading instruction is excellent use of reading.
Dr. Durrell, I'm now wondering about teacher education. As you know, I have some interest in this subject. And today at Western Washington State College, we are certainly putting more emphasis upon learning to teach reading than previously, and there is more interest shown on the part of students and returning teachers. I'd like to hear you talk about this for a moment or two. I know that you have been in the teacher education business now for a long time, and certainly have some ideas about the training, the education, particularly of the elementary teacher-to-be, or the one who's coming back for refresher work. What would you say about this big subject?
It's big, that's all I'll say. I suppose that anybody who is a professor of education, in particular reading, every year tries some way to make his work more effective, and I've been working at it a long while. One of the big problems is that the teachers now are not coming from the colleges. The teachers are coming from the homes. 9 out of 10 teachers in many places are mothers and grandmothers, so that what you do in the college now may affect them another generation, but not now.
Yes.
And many of these women are teaching in order to send their daughters to school, and then the daughters teach till the first child comes, and that's it. So we have a constantly changing profession. If we had a continuing professional group, it would be much easier. Then what we do in the colleges might make a difference. However, so that I think a large part of our service has got to be off-campus, in-service work done out there when schools are in session and done with demonstrations, because it's very difficult to convey by talk techniques as involved as taking care of 30 children with differing abilities, who with different progress rates, different levels, and different kinds of weaknesses. You can tell about this. So this is merely an evasion of the real problem. You've got to be able to demonstrate it. So I think that demonstrations by the professor are very important, and we do this rather than simply giving the general principles. So this should be done outside. I think also that there's far more learning by the student if he is teaching children at the time he's learning. And therefore, we are now, at our place, rotating all our juniors, 300 of them, through the clinic. So while they're taking courses in reading with me, they are tutoring children at the same time. And I find this far more effective.
Do you?
I had this experience of teaching half my course in reading before an 8-week bout of student teaching, and half afterward. The students came back after the teaching just loaded with questions. And every question they asked me, I had answered in the course prior to the time they went out.
Yes, but then it wasn't meaningful at that time.
It wasn't meaningful at all. And this is one of our problems, of teaching before you're ready. So I think that we've got to change much of our professional education, everything, but not reading only, but a lot of it's going to have to be done through experiences with children. Education, I think, is going to become a laboratory subject. And so we're going to see much of our psychology, other courses, taught through laboratory approaches.
And I suppose that in part means that some of the teaching is going to go on after the teacher has started to teach.
Well, I'm sure for you and for me, I suppose I learn more each year than my students do, because I'm engaging in a number of studies, and I can make a longer list of things I'm ignorant on in my field than a student can possibly. He doesn't know he's ignorant.
Of course.
So naturally, as long as you live, and the more mature the student, the more likely he is able to, to tackle the problems of ignorance in the profession. So we need a lot of research. Sure, we don't know how to teach all these youngsters. I should have said earlier, when I said that some schools do very well, some do badly, I think that our best approach to improving reading is going to be in improving materials of instruction that are self-directing and self-correcting.
I see.
So that you can broadcast those widely, to make it easier for a teacher to teach well. I think we'll probably get farther in building materials that make it easier to serve a child well than by just telling him how.
I take it that among those important materials are those afforded by the library. I've heard you talk about the importance of the library, maybe particularly for the advanced child, the child who has made good progress.
And one thing, by the way, I'm told here that you go in, that you have lots of elementary school libraries. In New England, this is one of the shames that we have. Our elementary school libraries are very poor.
I see.
We have relatively few schools that have a library in connection. We depend upon 30 books being sent in once a month, and other kinds of things which are useful. Of course, in the smaller towns, your public library is often very closely tied to the school, and there's good cooperation. But there's far too little in the way of library equipment in the schools in our area.
The library, then, is the place the child goes to go beyond the very elementary kind of reading.
That's where he learns to read. You don't learn to read by having reading lessons any more than you learn to play the piano by having piano lessons. It's the practice in between that makes the difference. And so the youngsters who spend hours and hours in avid reading are the ones, that's where reading is learned. It's where reading speed, it's where reading vocabulary is expanded by voluntary reading with a high degree of interest. Surely, every good reader is a person who's read a lot and has used the library and found it exciting.
Dr. Durrell, I'm now going to make a complaint that I have heard from many businessmen and employers of various kinds, and that is about the applicants for secretaries' jobs who come to us who cannot spell. Now, I'm not in a position to generalize about the extent of this, but certainly a casual observation would reveal that there is a lot of very, very poor spelling that goes on, and that is characteristic of a lot of people. I'm sure that this is a subject that you have given some thought to. What about the teaching of spelling, the learning how to spell?
Well, the problem, of course, is found in the fact that English sounds have different spellings.
So we're going to blame it on the
English
language now.
Well, in part, of course, we can. I'll just take, for example, it's so very easy to demonstrate the number of problems. Frankly, I think to the men who are worried because their secretaries can't spell, that means that nobody can spell in the office. If the secretary can, consequently, you have to have somebody that can spell. Spelling doesn't correlate with intelligence. Because of the variable nature of English spelling, the more you think, the less sure you are. You ask a person, how do you spell a word? And they say, I'll write it in C. And then the next thing they say, if you hadn't asked me, I could have told you. And I'm not sure. Because, of course, it doesn't follow any logic. For example, those of us who work in this field, you count words, you count sounds in words. The linguistics boys are playing with this also. But take the sound air. How do you spell air? Well, I'll turn to the board again. The most common way you spell air in English is A-I-R. And you can spell it, of course, the second most common way is this E-A-R in primary grade words. And the third most common way of spelling air is C-A-R-E. Well, now, How do you spell air? You've got your choices. What's the logic behind it? There's no logic behind it. You have to have an image behind each of these words.
Yeah.
So that actually phonics enables you to misspell words correctly. You see.
Yes, yes.
So this is one of the problems.
Well, you've now demonstrated that it's impossible to learn to spell well, I think.
We've been playing with this quite a lot. You have to teach in spelling. You can't do it by symbolic analysis or by phonetic analysis. It's got to be done, we find, by imagery behind the word. As though all words were homonyms. Take this one. This same one, pair, and you do through a usage technique, you say, well, which of these mean two partners? And you have to have the image behind the word. Mm-hmm. Not only the form of the word, but you've got to have this evoke images. You see, how about a pear-shaped person? Then the image of EAR has to come to mind, you see. And this, to cutting down things, paring a budget or paring your nails. There's nobody pairs budgets anymore, Washington especially. You can see my biases. But at any rate, you have to have the other. And consequently, it is the meaning and imagery that you have to emphasize in spelling. And so we've developed quite a number of imagery techniques to keep the meaning high. And it's quite surprising that this will evoke, you see, part of the jokes we get in this field are such things as this. You say to the, well, I'll see if I can think of one. A long stair led to the lady on the balcony. How did you get there? Mm-hmm. Which kind of stair led there?
Yes.
Or the Duke found the Duchess sitting on another pier. Well, there are problems here.
So really you have to learn almost one word at a time.
Yeah,
I take it in as learning to spell.
Exactly. And actually, the writing vocabularies are not so awfully large. Another one was, if a man has two pears in his hand, is he making salad or playing poker, you see? So the imagery has to be behind the word. It is virtually a learning of a word at a time with the right image.
That's very helpful.
You must teach all these words as though they were homonyms.
Thank you very much, Dr. Durrell.
You're welcome.